Hello and welcome to a special presentation from In the Money Media. This is our show for Cigar Mile Day, talking about the Pick Six out at Aqueduct. Used to be the last grade one of the year in New York. We've lost that designation, but it still marks the end of the season to me in many ways. And I'm very happy to be diving in and playing these races and getting a chance to talk about them with two of my favorite people to talk about racing anywhere, but particularly when it comes to New York. First, we'll bring him in, a man whose achievements I will not get into listing because it would take the rest of the show. Let's just say he's a legendary horse player and author. He's Stephen Crist. Steve, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, Pete.
And then we bring in the more familiar guy who was just on with me talking about these Gulfstream all-turf pick three races. Now we get him back to his bread and butter. I assume you'll also be able to see him this weekend on the America's Day at the Races feed, probably in the same technology setup, I'm guessing. He's Jonathon Kinchen. JK, am I right? Are you doing the shows from there this weekend?
Yeah, I'm doing it from here, but the problem is my wife and my son, they like to try to kick me out to like even though this is a good background, they're going to try to they're going to try to get me out of here so that I don't affect their lives, which seems very selfish of them.
I suggest you put a book by Pete Fornatal and a book by Steve Crist on the mantle behind you, and then you'll have the perfect backdrop for national television.
Well, two of my favorite books, Exotic Betting and then Betting with an Edge.
There you go. We'll take it. Let's talk about the sequence in general first. Steve, is this one that you're particularly excited about, or one that you're more likely to be playing just because it has these big stakes races and its position on the calendar?
Well, I think it's an interesting sequence because, maybe you guys have a clearer picture of the Cigar Mile than I do, but I just want to get alive to a bunch of horses in that last leg. I think it's a great race to handicap and play, but I found it extremely difficult.
JK, how about you? Are you excited to sink your teeth into this one?
Absolutely. And when we jump into the first race, I'll elaborate on this a little bit more. This is more of a game selection game for me. I know we're talking pick six here. Based on my opinions of the first leg, I'm more of a pick five player, I think, today. Mm-hmm. It's all the money going into the pool, so no one's going to be upset about that. I don't have a strong opinion in the first leg, which is going to require me to use a lot of horses. And I think often when you feel that way, you have to then tailor what wager you're going to be playing. So for me, I'm going to be more of a pick five guy just because, and I'll explain, I think the first leg is pretty wide open.
Well, let's just go right there. It is race number 5 where we'll begin, 1:48 Eastern, the scheduled post time for this starter allowance going a mile. You've already tipped your hand, JK, that it's a spread race for you. How many numbers would you need to feel confident in here?
Look, I don't want to be an all-button guy, right? But the David Jacobson entry, I think you probably have to use. They're right there off of numbers, both of them. I think that the 4 St. James Palace ran pretty well last time after breaking a step slow, right there from a figure standpoint. Mandatory has back numbers, comes in off of a layoff, though. So you don't know which mandatory you're going to get. Brooklyn Diamonds at a short price, who got a huge setup last time with a fast pace in front. That's not a horse that I can lean on at a short price. Cloud Forest can win. American Law can win. Vodka Mardini wouldn't be the biggest shock to me. My advice to you in this race is to use as many as you possibly can. Or like I said, like the way that I'm personally going to play it is I'm not going to play the pick 6, and I'll just spend all of my time in the pick 5 where I do feel like I have a little bit more opinion.
Sometimes in a situation like this, especially when you have an entry that's going to take money that I don't necessarily love, I will just get really tight and play a number or two full with the knowledge that I can always come back and play the pick 5. And to me, it was honestly 2 fairly obvious horses I thought were going to get good trips, including Brooklyn Diamonds, who you mentioned, JK, just because I thought the pace would set up for a late run again from this Linda Rice runner. And American Law was another one I thought might just get the perfect stalk and pounce kind of a run in here. But very curious to bring in Steve to get his thoughts on this one. Is this a race you can narrow down a bit more than JK?
Yes and no, and I think he made a great point. If you're choosing between the pick 6 and the pick 5, if you feel that this is a race where you need to go 5 deep, combine that with the fact that the pick 6 base bet is twice as much, you're really looking at a 10 times, a 10x investment on the pick 6 versus the pick 5. Now, if you want to play the pick six anyway, or you've got some good ideas later, great. But, I agree about this first leg. The reason that I'm leaning toward the pick six rather than the pick five is that I'm looking to beat a couple of short horses in this first leg. I'm not a big Brooklyn Diamonds fan. I mean, the horses he has been running against, I think, are just a big cut below these. And I think there are 3 or 4 horses in here, whose best races drown what Brooklyn Diamonds has been doing lately. I'm going to use mandatory very strongly, American law, and then a few other C's. I don't like the Jacobson entry at all. By the way, Kingdom, I think, is running today. So you're only going to have half of that entry in tomorrow. The Can't Beat the Rock is running there.
Interesting. In terms of those deeper backups, Steve, which ones would you think of throwing in?
Oh, I mean, I can use St. James. The problem is you've got 10 betting interests here, and 7 of them, are capable of running a number in the low to mid 80s. So it's, there's not much differentiation. So, I'm going to lean a little bit on mandatory and American law, but then have a bunch of C's.
Gotcha. Let's talk about race number 6, which is an allowance race going 7 furlongs on the dirt. Field of 10 going forward here. Steve, we'll keep it with you.
Well, I think this race, absolutely goes through the Todd Pletcher returnee, whose name is eluding me at the moment. Overstep. This is looked like very much like a stakes horse. Todd is very, he's a half length away from being undefeated. And Todd is terrific at these kind of, coming back from long layoffs. I think if he's still the horse that he was, 8 months ago, he's going to be extremely hard to beat. He's a single A in this race for me.
Any backups you want to name check, or is it really all about 3 as far as your proper opinion goes?
My backups would be Ocean's Reserve, Rocco Strong, and I thought there was an interesting 20-30 to 1 horse in here. And that's the 10 Looney Sema. He's 20 to 1 on the line. But you go through his form, he occasionally throws in a big one that's every bit as good as the favorites in this race. Making his 3rd start off a layoff. The comeback race was fine. Last time was a sloppy track he didn't handle at all. So, if you can draw lines through those 2 races, I think he's a little bit of an interesting creative horse, and he's going to be a gigantic price.
I've always had a little bit of affection for Looney Sema and that ability to turn up once in a while with a winning race at a number. 3rd race is a gelding as well, if you wanted to go in that direction. But I think that almost all of my play will go through Overstep. I feel like in addition to all those points, just looks like one who might be able to boss things from the front end here and just get the best trip and do his thing. Though I definitely, and on Steve say so as much as anything else, we'll be throwing in a little bit of Looney Sema as well. JK, are you with Overstep or against?
Yeah, the single A for me. I mean, I think if you look at all 4 of his races, there's been adversity that he's overcome in every race. The debut, obviously it's a debut. You got to overcome some adversity there. Your first time on the racetrack, he was very impressive that day. Then he came back in the Sleepy Hollow, and I thought showed some courage to kind of run through in between horses. And then the last 2, I thought he's been involved in some honest paces and it was able to kind of stick around. I just think he's better than these horses. I think that because he's a New York bred, they're taking their time and kind of going through the conditions rather than jumping up into a stake spot. I feel like this is a stake horse, and I'll be ice cold here to this half brother to Arctic Arrogance, who was another nice horse that we saw here in New York.
So first you said Lone A, then you said ice cold. And no.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, ice cold A, which could also be interpreted as Lone A, but I also understand that Lone A could be meaning I'm not using 2 A's. So I mean ice cold A, as in I won't be using B's or C's.
Okay, there you go. Let's move on to the stakes portion of the card, where we've got the 2-year-old fillies in the grade 2 Damoiselle. Field of 9 going postward. I'm pretty boring here, so I'll just go ahead and chime in that I thought that the favorite, Life Talk, the 3-runner, was going to take a lot of beating based on what we've seen from her on the racetrack. JK, will she be one you're looking to press up, or perhaps one you'll be looking to spin in the spot?
Well, I think the very important thing to remember about this race, and as well as the Remsen, is that it's so much less about who's the best and fastest horse and who wants to go the mile and an eighth at this point of their career. And with Dolomite, not very fast, has not been overly impressive outside of the fact that they won by 6 last time with a slow number. But the fact that the way that Chad's horses run, they, to me, in the way they're trained, have more ability to go a mile and an eighth at this age because they're taught to be on the bridle all the time and they respond to their riders. So Dolomite is one that, although looks too slow, could jump up. I'll use Dolomite. I'll use Life Talk because I think you have to use Life Talk because she is the fastest. It is Todd Pletcher. It is 2 turns on the dirt. Who does that better than Todd? And then I'll also use the 7 Shimmering Allure, who's got some experience. So you'd like to think that the 9 furlongs won't be a problem. And then the outside horse Caldwell Loves Gold. Brad Cox, conversely, opposite of of Chad, I think that his horses can sometimes get the 9 furlongs a little bit earlier because they're trained so hard and so fast that the bottom is literally to the ground of these horses. And I think sometimes that can kind of jump up and help as well. This is a spread race for me. I think Life Talk's going to be over bet, and I'm hoping to beat her, although I need to keep her in play here because I do think she has a legit chance to win.
2-3-7-9. Does that sound like it's
good
opinion here? Steve, how about you? Where do you stand on Life Talk? First of all, JK and I a little oppo with how seriously we're taking her chances.
I'm surprised she's the shortest price in this entire pick 6 sequence. I mean, on morning line, she's 8-5 in here. And, everyone gets excited when they see somebody run decently in a Breeders' Cup race. But I don't think she's any better than Shimmering Allure, who I thought was very visually impressive last time. I mean, yeah, she got a good setup, but you know what? She's going to get another good setup in here. There's plenty of speed. A lot of horses who are questionable going this far. So, as Jonathon said, I'm not throwing out Life Talk. I'm not taking a big position, but she's only going to be one of 3 or 4 that I use in here, and I'll probably be kind of rooting against her. I thought that Vino Rouge ran very well last time against Shimmering Allure, close to the pace, stayed right there. Was second best that day, but is putting blinkers on. And I think you're going to get every bit of that 8-1. And again, I don't see Life Talk as being vastly superior to a horse like Vino Rouge. And I'll probably even use a little bit, as C's of Ringy Dingy and Caldwell Loves Gold. Caldwell Loves Gold, I think that she's probably going to end up being a closing sprinter. Really more of a 6-7 furlong horse than stretching out. I didn't think she had any excuse last time at 2-5. And it looked to me like she just didn't want to go a mile. So why is she going to go a mile and an eighth?
Vino Rouge is definitely worth pausing on. It has the classic Andy. I associate it with Andy Beyer, the move into the hot pace trip handicapping angle that may be the difference between her and Shimmering Allure isn't as much as those 3 furlongs. And just looking at bloodlines, Vino Rouge does seem like one for whom the mile and an eighth could be acceptable. I'll take this opportunity to go on a tangent, Steve, and ask you about the panel you're going to be on out in Tucson. Have you guys done much prep work about the kinds of stories you're going to be telling, or are you just going to be going up there and winging it? It's definitely one of the ones I circled looking through the catalog is the most interesting things to hear on the course of the 3 days.
I've done no prep whatsoever. I just plan on winging it and telling stories. This is a panel. It's me, Andy Beyer, and Jay Privman, and we're not going to get up and make formal presentations about Heisa or anything. We're just going to take questions from Charlie Hayward, who's moderating it, and from the audience. And, I've found over the years that the Q&A is always the best part of these things. So, just going to sit back. That doesn't mean we won't, nice thing about being retired, you say whatever you want. You really don't care. So, someone wants to talk about the Triple Crown or synthetic tracks or anything. I'm not pulling any punches.
I've gotten nervous about public speaking once in my adult life, and it was before the Tucson conference last year. And Steve, I think it has to do with exactly what you said of when you are an industry supported organization like In the Money, but I was there in fully the context of being a horse player. And that was what made me nervous. It was like, I can't worry about the fact that half these people are my clients. I got to talk like a horse player and do my best to tell it like it is. And it was stressful. I think it worked out okay, but it is great to hear. And I'll keep that in mind, maybe for a question or two. I'll look to ask you as an audience member coming out of that panel. JK, do you wish you were going to the symposium now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I had fun when I went. I've been once. They said they were going to pay for my flight, and they never did. So that's interesting. But no
one holds a grudge like JK.
Yeah, 7 emails later. But no, I mean, no, it's a fun event. I've always met a lot of nice people there and heard a lot of great topics, and it's always good. I think places like that where industry folks can kind of come together and be in one place at one time, have conversations, listen to presentations, but more importantly, the conversation part, right? Which I think is kind of missing in our game, where a lot of people have their positions, but they argue in 100 and some odd characters on Twitter. I think maybe sometimes sitting down with an adult beverage and looking each other in the eye is a much more productive way to kind of have some of the conversations that need to be had.
It's funny you mentioned that, because there's people out there who I had only known from Twitter and had formed sort of negative opinions of, who I was able to meet there and have conversations with, and have become people whose opinions I respect on things. So I think that's very much true, that even in the modern world where it's wonderful that we can, connect like this in a video call and see each other's faces or whatever. But what we used to mean when we talked about FaceTime still means something. And it's cool that you get to have that out at the RTIP symposium. Tangent over. Let's talk about the Gopher Wand. Race number 8, fillies and mares going a mile on the dirt. I want to start the conversation, JK, with Gerrymander, who I kept going back and forth between thinking was a serious contender in the race and thinking was the most dressed up horse of all time coming out of the 2-runner race at Belmont at Aqueduct. I ended up deciding I was going to oppose her in this spot. Who do you think is going to win the Gopher Wand?
Yeah, I'm going to let her beat me. Look, prior to her winning by 25 lengths on a match race, a match race she was supposed to win, she's been beat 7 times. Sometimes at short prices, facing significantly lesser, with situations that were supposed to fall right into her lap, and she didn't take advantage of it. I think, with the 25 length win last time, the fact that she's a Klarovich-owned, Chad Brown trained, Jose Ortiz ridden horse that was, a buzz horse as a 3-year-old in the Alabama. I'm going to try to beat her here. I think Tizzy in the Sky, the 5, that's the horse I want if I'm going to look for a horse with some speed. And if I'm going to look for a Chad Brown, give me Good Sam towards the outside. I'll use the 5 and the 7 as A horses, and I will not use the 6 Gerrymander as a B. I don't want to waste the equity. If she beats me based on what I feel about this sequence, I'm probably going to be mad that I hit it anyways. So I'm going to try to keep the equity with the 5 and the 7 only.
I thought the 2 Dr. B was the other one I wanted to include with your 2, JK. What did you have against this 5-year-old mare?
A lot of times it's not really an against thing. It's just more of a, preferring the others. But Dr. B hasn't won in a while either. And that was a situation where I thought was bias aided when she did win. So just an opportunity to try to beat a horse. I think I'll probably take a little bit of money.
Yeah, I hear where you're going with that. Steve, what about you? Who wins the Gopher Wand?
Well, it's going to be one of the 3 bottom horses, Tizzy in the Sky, Gerrymander, or Good Sam. And I lean the same way that JK does. For me, it's A5, 7, B6, the rest nowhere.
All right, there you go. Very succinct. And I will just not challenge you, but ask you why you're a little bit more sympathetic to Gerrymander than either of us are. You think there's a chance she could dominate from a pace point of view, or is she maybe better than JK and I are giving her credit for in terms of her recent running lines?
Well, she's still got a couple of races that are very, very good. And I think it's possible that she is finally coming back to form. I mean, she's on a nice upward trajectory, improving race to race, as if she were on the verge of running back to her mother goose. And then, the silly match race she was hardly persevered with while winning by 25 lengths. So I think if she can, launch off that good second to Nostalgia 2 back and improve off that, she's okay. And I was surprised that she's as short as 2-1 on the line. I thought she was going to be the 3rd choice. Tizzy in the Sky has really gotten good. I mean, I have the race 2 back even a little better than Bayer does. It is the 91. I have it more like a 95. And, she was terrific last time against Interstate Daydream, who would be favored in this race.
Yeah. I think it may be a rare case, and we don't knock morning lines around here. And David Aragona obviously is as good as anybody at it, but I'm tempted to say that might be a little skinny on gerrymander. Although who knows? He's so good. Maybe he picked up on some other buzz of why the public is going to gravitate there a little bit more than we did. Next up is the Remsen Grade 2 action for the 2-year-olds. Once again, going the mile and eighth. A lot of horses that were very prominent in the recently concluded Kentucky Derby future pool. JK, who do you like in here?
Yeah, I'm going to single A, single B here. I'm going to single A, the 3 Dornoch. Look, I mean, he's shown a lot of talent. His race at Keeneland was outstanding. Got a fast number that day. And when it comes to like what I talked about earlier, a horse that you think wants to go the mile and an eighth, how about a horse that's a full to a Kentucky Derby winner? That works enough for me. I just think that this is the best horse in this group, and the horse that I know definitely wants to go this far. I'll use the 2 Domestic Product as my B horse, who I thought ran well last time, got a nice figure going 9 furlongs. And we've talked about how I feel about Chad Brown with these types of horses, these young horses. They're trained to respond to their rider. So when they need to shut them off, they typically will shut off unless they're a Lope de Vega named newspaper of record.
What about Sierra Leone? Speaking of Chad Brown runners, and you're a little surprised that one didn't end up in your reckoning. Definitely had some buzz ahead of that debut and caught a reasonable amount of money in the Derby future pool, given the resume. I thought there might be some stories around about this one, and you usually are the kind of guy who hears those stories.
Yeah, I mean, sure. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if the horse wins. And I'm not playing musical jockeys with Manny, but Manny going with the other one, I think it's at least a little bit of a lean. But at the same time, I also don't think it would be very smart for Manny to take off a Klarovich horse, considering that his run that he's on right now has to be partly responsible to Klarovich allowing him to ride Chad's horses in the winter and things like that, even in the summer as well. So, but I just from a number standpoint, from going 9 furlongs last time, I just felt like the other Chad made a lot of sense. And like I said, I think Dornoch's going to win. So if I'm going to use another horse, let me use one that presents a little bit of value.
I was willing to. I don't disagree with your enthusiasm for Dornoch. The horse makes plenty of sense. I was worried a little bit about maybe being a bit overbet in a race that I see as a little bit more open than you, JK. And I do think Domestic Product is very, very interesting as a horse who I think is going to trip out beautifully in here. The other runner I was kind of interested in was number 5, Drumroll Please, who you didn't mention, who I thought looked good winning the maiden and just sort of shapes like one who will appreciate the added ground and obviously is in great hands with Cox and Castellano. I was going to reach for horses I thought might be 6, 8, 10 to 1 and try to build here and maybe find a way to save with Dornoch in other pools. Steve, got to bring you in here.
Well, Pete, real quick, I want to let me kind of bring Steve in because I want to ask him a question.
Yeah, do it.
I'm a huge, obviously I talked about the book Exotic Betting earlier. The phrase overbet to me, I just want to get your take on this idea. The phrase overbet to me is so much less important to me and almost unimpactful to me if I'm singling a horse in a pick 6 or pick 5. Like I feel like the fact that I'm singling a horse in a sequence of that nature, that the overbetness of the horse really, really kind of dissipates.
I couldn't agree with you more. When you're playing a pick 6, it's a binary thing. It's a yes or no. You're singling a horse. The fact that he's, if he goes off at 3 to 5 and you think even money is more of a fair price, I mean, so what? It's completely meaningless. You just got to get through the race and get your horse home. So no, I have no problem singling a horse who's going to be an underlay. As I say, I'm just trying to get him to win the race. I don't really care what his win pool value is.
It's different pools for one thing, but I think your larger point is correct. And Steve, I've heard you refer to these multi-legged exotics before as almost a form of a tournament, and the ability to build equity throughout that tournament, or because you're theoretically an underlay in one pool doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be in the pick 6. I think we've just made some of the EV police's heads explode, JK. But I'm not sure that's entirely a bad thing. Now the key question for you, Steve: who wins the Remsen?
I don't know, but I mean, I'm interested in a couple of horses that you guys haven't mentioned. Obviously, you have to use Dornoch. Although I will point out that the second and third finishers in that, big race he ran at Keeneland have returned to fall off by 5 or 6 points. So, I'm not sure that 90 figure is necessarily going to hold up. And he did lose his first 2 starts, but yes, he's one of the horses who can win. I thought Moonlight was every bit as interesting as Dornoch in here. I thought his off the turf maiden breaker that came up as fast a race as Dornoch's, and last time was in the slop. He didn't look at all comfortable in that race on the wet track. I think if Moonlight runs back to his maiden victory, he's right there. And I also thought that Todd's horse on the bottom, Private Desire, another with a very big figure maiden breaking. And then last time out in the Nashua, he was off slow. He was at the back of the field, and it was a race that was completely dominated on the front end, with Where's Crist being very game, but nobody, cut in to the big margins in that race. So, for me, it's going to be something like, A 3, 4, 10. Sierra Leone is very intriguing, but, to go up from a maiden win that wasn't particularly fast, it was visually impressive. But boy, then in your second start to stretch to 1.125 miles in the Rems, and I just think, he may be fine by March, but this might be a little early for a graded stakes for him.
I think you brought up the key point, and that probably is the reason why there was buzz around this horse. Really did look very professional for a first-time starter, but this is the kind of thing we've talked about so much over the years. When those races don't come back fast, I might still make a note like this is a cool, classy horse, maybe has some intangible, softer kind of skills, but that doesn't make slower horses win races their next start out. So I share that. I share that skepticism for the same reason. Let's get to the race that gives the day its name. It's the Grade 2 Cigar Mile. It's a big field of 12 here. And while we don't have much in the way of proven Grade 1 form, I do think we have a super competitive race. Steve, Crist, who's your idea of the winner?
Well, I'm going to cop out here and default to the 49er. If you only let me use 2 horses in this race, I think they would be Ever So Mischievous and Dr. Ardito. They're both solid. They both figure to get decent trips. There's very, very little separation figure-wise. Just about every horse in this race routinely runs between 95 and 100. So, it's not like there are 4 horses who just don't belong in the race. That makes things tricky.
I hear you, and I think there certainly have to be among the logicals. We'll probably come back to you, Steve, for an examination of some of the longer shots. I want to chime in about 3 technique. I'm very interested in 3 technique in this spot. I think might be due to run a lot better third start of the layoff, going this mile, the kind of trip I'm assuming that he's going to get in here where there is plenty of speed signed on. And I think you really do have a chance to get all of that 8-1 on the morning line. Very, very interested in him. The other horse I'm super interested in here, I talked about this as a race that doesn't have a lot of a proven Grade 1 form. Accretive is a horse I've always thought hinted at being capable of Grade 1 efforts. And while it didn't work out last time, I think that was a question of just lack the needed punch after a wide trip. Like I don't think that race was as bad as it looks. And I don't think he's as far behind Ever So Mischievous and Dr. Ardito necessarily as that race suggests. And I think he's going to be, hopefully, we're going to get the 4-1 and the hype machine doesn't come too hard down on him. I was going to mess around with the 7 and 10 mostly, but obviously the 2 and the 5 are very, very likely contenders here. And I'd love to have some tickets that are alive to all 4 of those. JK, how about you?
Yeah, I'm going to pick the 2 Ever So Mischievous on top. This is a horse I've just been following for a while. Obviously, our relationship with Qatar Racing, and when I had Sheikh Fahad on JK+1, he actually said he thinks this is the best horse that they have in training in the entire world, and I agree. I think Ever So Mischievous is a very talented horse. He's a taste light on numbers, but sometimes that can happen when you're running against straight 3-year-olds. And I think maybe the opportunity to kind of run against some faster horses, I think could maybe suck his figure on a little bit to kind of help him out. And I also think that if he wins this race and then goes on and wins the Malibu, if people don't turn in their ballots too early, he'll get some votes for 3-year-old of the year. I don't think he'll win, but he'll definitely get some votes and possibly be a finalist. Senor Buscador, another one that I'm going to definitely use as an A horse. His running lines look a little bit kind of underwhelming because he just doesn't have a lot of early speed, and he comes running, but he just never really gets there, but he runs fast numbers. I think he's one of those horses, and I don't want to compare him to Elite Power of cutting back from 7 to 6, but I think he's been running at the 10 furlong, 9 furlong races. I think the cutback with real pace to close into is going to have this horse rolling down the middle of the track while the rest of them might be getting a little bit tired. So I'll use those two as A horses, and then B horses, I'll use the 10 and 11, the 10 Accretive, the 11 Hoist the Gold, and then I'll use one more horse as a B horse, a sneaky one, and that's the 6 High Oak. I don't know if it's because every time I run into Lee Einsiedler, he just gets me so fired up about how well High Oak is doing. But let's not forget that High Oak did have a pretty nice run as a 2-year-old. He's had some talent. He's shown some talent. He's older now, and maybe, just maybe, the right situation can kind of wake him up. And if he was 5-1, I wouldn't bet him with your money, Pete. But he's going to be 30-1. He'll be completely ignored. He's the type of horse that could blow up the pick six.
And I could certainly see getting a piece. I mean, that was my thought with Buscador. Was I think he's going to take a ton of money, and maybe you're right. The strongly run mile will see him to best effect. But I have this vision of him. I certainly wouldn't leave him out of vertical exotics, but I was having the feeling maybe we could beat him on top. Steve, you mentioned that your main interests in here are the 2 Ever So Mischief and the 5 Dr. Ardito. But in terms of backup lines or more interesting horses, as it were, who can you come up with?
Yeah, I mean, those are the 2, as I said, that, if you put a gun to my head and I could only use 2, but I'd like to have 4 or 5 A's in this race. I think Senor Buscador makes a lot of sense because there is a lot of sprint speed in this race, and their horses, I'm not sure they really want to go a mile, and I think this race could start falling apart at the 8th pole, and he's probably the strongest pure finisher. I mean, if someone's looping the field and rolling on the outside, I think it's going to him. I will use 3 Technique strongly. I agree with everything Pete said. He's also kind of a favorite of mine because I had him on Derby Day 2 derbies ago when he paid $76. So I'm willing to waste a little money on him every time that he runs. I owe him. So, I always use him. A creative, I'm not entirely sold on the distance with him, but he's right there, with the other 2 horses out of the 49er that I like. So he's strong with me. Hoist the Gold, I'm going to let beat me. I think he's a 6-7 furlong horse. I just don't see him thriving in a mile. And, Pipeline, I've been trying to make him a good horse for a long time. And I don't see how moving out of Chad's barn is suddenly going to resurrect his career.
Maybe he goes on a mission to try to lead him from gate to wire, but boy, it's going to be tough. I think I really like the prediction of whatever happens with the speed up front. I really like the prediction of Ever So Mischievous being the best of that speed, and then it's a question of if the closers are going to come or not. That's how I see it.
If someone would give me I'm bad at the game of math, but if someone were to give me a number on Ever So Mischievous or Mischievous in the Met Mile next year, I think this horse has a chance to really kind of grow up and turn into a really damn good horse that has speed, has stamina, and has some toughness, and obviously is in the right trainer's hands to win a race like that.
Would love to see it. It's good to have. It's good to have some of these rising 4-year-olds who look like they could have legitimate Grade 1 credentials, and if things work out for Ever So Mischievous, he could certainly be on that list. Well, gentlemen, I've kept you a little bit over time, but hope you don't mind. It's always so fun to talk New York racing with you, and we always get a great response. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and leave us your idea of who is going to win the Cigar Mile or any of these races. Either it's fun to want to get a little bit more interactive going forward with the comments on there. But for now, I'm just going to thank Stephen, Crist, and JK one more time, our founding partners at 10 Strike Racing and the Thoroughbred Retirement Foundation. But most of all, want to thank all of you, the listeners and the viewers, for making these shows so much fun to do. If you want to support us, sign up for our content, subscribe over at YouTube, get our podcast wherever you get your podcasts in the Money Media. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.